Okay, welcome to part 2 of my XR2 Rescue Mission video series that I'm putting together. Now, if you haven't seen the first part, then I would recommend that you go ahead and shut this off and go watch part 1 first. In part 1, I showed that we have this XR2 over here, and it's in a low Earth orbit, and it's basically completely out of fuel. It only has 1% of RCS, which is just enough fuel that will allow it to maybe do a rotation or something like that, but otherwise it's completely out of fuel. And I showed in part 1 that it had 5 hours and 43 minutes of LOX. We're now down to 4 hours and 7 minutes. And if we don't rescue the crew here within that amount of time, then everybody on board is going to die. So let's go back to the rescue ship. And we undocked the XR1, or rather we undocked this XR from the ISS, and we used a concept called atmospheric surfing. At least that's what we call it in Orbiter. I don't know if that's a real thing, but we use that method to get into alignment with the other XR2. So if we bring that up here on map MFD, we can see that we are now in perfect alignment with the other XR vessel. So now it becomes a matter of rendezvousing with the other XR2, and that's what we're going to do in this video. So let's get started. Now currently we are in a really low Earth orbit, 125 kilometer, or rather 124 kilometer periapsis, and a 132 kilometer apoapsis. That's really low. It's not very healthy. We would actually degrade over time and crash into the Earth, but we're high up enough that it's going to be okay for this purpose. And it also allows us to catch up to the other XR2 a little more quickly since we're down lower. Eventually, I'm going to need the frequency of the other XR2. So let's go ahead and get that dialed in now. Its transponder is 117.70. And its one and only docking port is 117.95. Okay, and we're probably close enough now. Yeah, we can actually see, we can get information from dock MFD now. What I'm going to do to rendezvous, I'm going to use transx instead of sync orbit. So we'll bring up an external MFD. And I've done this before. It's been a while, so maybe I'll just kind of walk through again how it is that we use transx to do a rendezvous. Here we are in view setup, and the first thing that we're going to do, currently it's set to select target planet's moons. I'm going to do an adjustment there to put it on ships. And for the target ship, we'll press ++, then we need to type in, the XR2-02, make that a little smaller. So now we've got our target ship selected. Now this view that we're looking at isn't the best view for doing a rendezvous. So if we go through the variables, and come over here to graph projection, and I can change the graph projection to focus. This will work better for setting up a rendezvous. Now, since we are below the other XR2, we need to raise our orbit in order to rendezvous. So we'll come over to maneuver mode, turn maneuver mode on, and we're not going to need a lot of progrades, so let's go down to a ultra setting, and now let's just add in enough prograde to raise our orbit so that it matches the orbital altitude of the other vessel. Let's go to the super setting. And this is our position over here. So as I'm raising my orbit, it's the dashed yellow line is showing up on that side. And what I want to do is raise it so that the dashed yellow line goes all the way out to the point that it intersects with the orbital altitude of the other XR2. And it's about right there. I can see here that the dashed yellow line is starting to cross over. So now I'm going to come over to the date variable, and we need to find out when it's going to be the best time to do this maneuver. So now I'm adding in, time, and I'm just watching the closest approach. Looks like right about here, but I can see that when I'm at that point, the orbital altitude is a little low. So I'm going to come back to prograde and add in a little more prograde, and that will of course bring down the closest approach. I'm going to go back to the date. Back to prograde. And back to date. I'm just going to go back and forth between these variables until I get the closest approach really low. And if necessary, I'll even add in some outward. Sometimes that can help. But I think I'll be able to get it mainly just with prograde and date. Okay, a little more date. Got the closest approach down to 6 kilometers. And we're continuing to go down. Okay. And we're getting really close. 2.5 kilometers. 1.5. And we're there. It's, we're there. That's 500 meters, less than 500 meters. So let's look at their delta V cost. It is about 60 meters per second, and we're going to do this burn in just 600 seconds or 10 minutes. So let's go ahead and warp time ahead, get closer to that point. This is mostly going to be prograde, so I'm going to go to the prograde position. Make that a little smaller. And we're almost there. Okay.
Rotation.
Let's switch over to rotation now. Get the green X lined up all the way. And we're going to do the burn in 28 seconds, but let me warp time ahead. Okay, we're almost there.
Translation.
I'm going to get this last little bit like we usually do with translation. And that's going to be pretty precise right there. So VW over to maneuver. Off. And according to TransX, we're going to have a closest approach of 352 meters. We're done with TransX, so I can go ahead and close that out. And now we'll just watch dock MFD, and I can switch my HUD over to the docking HUD. And I'm just going to warp time forward till I get close to the XR2.
Rotation.
I'm going to go ahead and turn the APU on now. Open the nose cone while I'm thinking about it. Going to open the retro doors because I'm going to plan on using the retro engines to slow myself down. Turn the APU off. I also need to have the nose cone open on the other XR2, so let me switch over to that vessel. And we still got 3.5 hours of oxygen left, so we'll have no problem getting the rescue completed in time. Let's open the nose cone. turn the APU off, and we'll switch back to the other vessel, the rescue vessel. Okay, we're closing in at 114 meters per second. Let me use burn time calculator for a moment just to get an idea of how long that'll take to eliminate that much velocity using the retro engines. And according to burn time calculator, we would need 1 kilometer, and we're still 68 kilometers away. And of course this number will continue to go down as we get closer. Now we're all the way down to 33 meters per second, so let's update burn time calculator, put in 33, and we would only need 95 meters to slow ourselves down, so we don't even really need this information anymore. We can just eyeball it at this point. Starting to see a little bit of flicker from the navigation lights on the other XR2. It's 10 kilometers out. And I believe, yeah, I can switch to the nav 2 at this point. Go ahead and warp time ahead. Get to the other XR2 quicker. And technically, we wouldn't want to thrust in the direction of the other vessel. At least we may not want to, for the purpose of, you know, not spraying gas on it or whatever, but I'm not going to worry about that.
Translation.
That's something that I heard Featherwing Love talk about a lot in his videos. And he has some great videos, by the way. Excuse me. He has some really nice videos.
Rotation.
So if you haven't seen them, I recommend watching them. And I'll put a link to his website in the or his YouTube channel in the description, so you can check out his videos. We're all lined up. If you look really closely there, you can see the lights.
Translation. Rotation.
And we want to get in really close before we start the braking. Here it comes.
1,000.
About a kilometer out.
900. 800. 700. 600. 500. 400. 300.
Okay, let's brake.
200. Translation.
Okay.
100.
I'm going to start moving in the direction of the docking corridor, which we don't necessarily need, but that will be the You know, that'll get us lined up with the nose cone, the nose
75.
of the other XR2.
Rotation.
Let's go ahead and roll over.
Translation. Rotation. 50.
Make sure I don't bump it. Pretty darn close. I think we'll be okay. Now I'm going to start rotating. It'll put me out of eyesight with the XR2, but I just want to get rotated so that I'm lined up with the docking collar. Need that red X to be right in the middle. About like that.
40.
And we're sliding right past each other. Use a little bit of time acceleration to speed up the pass here. Okay, that should be good enough.
Translation.
Now I'm going to zero out the velocity so that I'm not moving away from it.
Rotation.
I'm going to line my X up a little bit. Oops, wrong way. Okay. So now it's just a simple matter of actually docking. And this will just take a moment.
Translation.
We're pretty well lined up. I just need to move forward.
15. Rotation.
Do a little bit of rotation.
Translation.
And we're moving forward at about a
9.
quarter of a meter per second. Might
8.
slow that down a little bit here in just a second.
7. 6. 5. 4. Rotation 3. Translation. 2.
And we'll watch them come together.
1. Contact.
Bravo, capture and hard dock. Congratulations.
I saw this vessel sort of jump there a little bit at the end, which means I might have been rotating a little bit. I should have jumped back inside real quick to make sure everything was perfectly lined up there at the last second. But nevertheless, we are now docked. So the rescue is effectively successful. Let's jump into the other XR2 and turn on external cooling,
Using external
and that will allow them to use our oxygen
external cooling
so that
online.
you can see their oxygen is now, that's not depleting anymore. So they're now breathing off of our air. Okay. Now there's a couple of things that I can do in order to help this vessel land. One of them is I could actually use the rescue ship, which is this one, to push against the other XR2 to lower its orbit. And then once its orbit was, say, down to, 20 kilometers or whatever, I could then undock and use my fuel to raise my orbit back up so that I wouldn't have to worry about the rescue vessel crashing. And then I could proceed to land with this vessel. But I think what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to transfer some fuel from this vessel to this vessel, and that will allow this vessel to do its own orbital maneuvers, and then this one can just go about its business on its own. So now that we're docked, I'm going to bring up refuel MFD. Actually, I guess it's called fuel transfer. And I can see here that this vessel, and currently, by the way, I'm in the one that doesn't have any fuel. It doesn't matter which vessel you use for the refuel, but since I'm in this vessel, I'll just use it. But it's showing that this vessel has 0 fuel in the main, 1% in the RCS, and then 0 in the scram. You can see tank 3 of 3, tank 1 of 3, and tank 2 of 3. That's this vessel. Now what I want to do here is press BV plus to change over to the docked vessel. And then I have to choose which fuel tank I'm going to take fuel out of. So we'll go to the main tank, and we're going to transfer fuel from its main tank to ours. And we don't need much. We just need enough to deorbit, which is maybe like 100 meters per second worth of fuel. We don't need much. So now I'm going to transfer fuel up. And you can see here we're draining fuel away from that vessel into ours. You can see the kilograms going up and the percentage going up. And if I look here at burn time calculator, I can see how many meters per second I have, but this isn't entirely accurate because I'm docked to the other vessel, so I'm going to figure I can take this times 2. So when it says 50 meters per second, then I'm guessing that that's more like 100 meters per second once I'm undocked. And this, you can speed up this fuel transfer by clicking up multiple times, but I want a slow transfer because I don't want to take any more fuel from the other vessel than I have to. We're at 53, so I've got that 100 meters per second that I need. I'll go ahead and take a little more. I'm going to say that's good enough. And even though the fuels are compatible, I'm going to go ahead and switch tanks. So now I've got the RCS tank selected on both vessels. Now I'm going to take some of the RCS from the other vessel as well, because 1%, I don't know if that's really going to be enough to do the orbital maneuvers. Actually, it probably is, because all I need to do is go retrograde, but because this vessel has the extra fuel, I'll go ahead and take some. And this time I'll do 2 clicks, and you can see it drains faster. And I'll just take 10%. That's good enough. Okay. Now that the fuel transfer is complete, and we're in good shape with the oxygen, I'm going to go ahead and say that this is the end of this part of the video. This was the rendezvous and refueling part, and in the next part, when I come back, we'll undock, and then we'll land this XR2 so that we have a completely successful mission. And once that vessel's landed, I may even try to take this vessel, the rescue vessel, I'm going to take it back to the ISS. And again, I'm going to do that without refueling. So using only the fuel that I have left after this vessel is landed, I'm going to see if I can take this one back to the ISS. Okay, so that's the end of this part. If you liked the video, leave me a comment down below, and I'll see you next time.